Welcome back, boxing fans, to another great show with Sean on Boxing. So, I'm going to do a two-part series, one regarding Bud Crawford, one regarding Canelo Alvarez. Today, we're going to break down and talk about Canelo Alvarez and talk about how much credit is Canelo Alvarez going to get if he beats Bud Crawford in this big matchup between the two of them this September. Obviously, right now, Canelo Alvarez is a pound-for-pound top 10 fighter. He is one of the best Mexican fighters of all time. He is a future Hall of Famer. Outside of Manny Pacquiao, who is considered active right now, Canelo Alvarez clearly has the best resume in the sport. He's also the face of American boxing as well, and obviously is getting paid a pretty penny from Saudi Arabia to step up to take on Bud Crawford in this career-defining fight. Let's break this down. This is the biggest fight of 2025. A lot of people, of course, want to push and direct Canelo Alvarez towards the David Benavidez, and that's fine. If that's the fight you prefer, I can't hate on you. Everybody has preferences. For me, I was never leaning towards a Bud Crawford Canelo Alvarez fight, but I understand the significance and the financial backing behind it. Obviously, this is the biggest fight of 2025. This is a bigger fight than a David Benavidez would ever have been, because Bud Crawford is a far more accomplished opponent. So let's keep that in context. If Bud Crawford, or Canelo Alvarez in this case, beats Bud Crawford, he's beating another pound-for-pound top 10 fighter in boxing. Some people, of course, want to dismiss Canelo Alvarez by saying that he's pulling Bud Crawford up in weight, but that's not what's happening. Canelo Alvarez did not go out of his way to try to make this fight or to call out Bud Crawford. This was not his ambition. This was Bud Crawford's ambition, which of course we'll break down when we talk about Bud Crawford and his goals and expectations. But when you look from Canelo Alvarez's perspective, this is a guy who's a four-weight world champion. Obviously, he's currently an undisputed 168-pound world champion. Him defending his title against an unbeaten future Hall of Famer like Terence Crawford is a legacy fight. He's fighting a historically great fighter. This is no different than, say, a guy like Aaron Pryor fighting Alexis Arguello, who came up in weight. Alexis Arguello is by and far the best opponent on Aaron Pryor's resume. The fights were great, super competitive. Both guys did very well, but in both cases, Aaron Pryor came away with the victories. And historically, Alexis Arguello is ranked probably higher on most pound-for-pound lists over Aaron Pryor. But Aaron Pryor is the one with the more significant victory on his resume. And for Canelo Alvarez, this may not be his best win of his career, but it's definitely one of the most significant wins of his career. And let's break this down. Obviously, we know Canelo Alvarez is going to be the thicker, potentially stronger fighter at that weight class. He's not going to necessarily be the tallest, and he's definitely not the longer fighter of the two. He definitely doesn't have the better footwork. He may not even have the faster hands, even though he does have fast hands. But most definitely, he has the power in this matchup. And he's obviously a guy who utilizes counter-punching, pressure, and heavy punching to break opponents down. He's not the highest volume puncher, and that's probably a negative, especially considering most people look at Mexican fighters as being very aggressive, high volume type of fighters that wear you down and break you down. For Canelo Alvarez, obviously him moving up in weight, what this did was allow him to be a little faster and quicker than a lot of the bigger fighters he was facing, since he is one of the smallest 168-pound champions in history. And that's what makes this such an exciting matchup between these two fighters. Another exciting aspect to this is the fact that many people have thought that they've seen Canelo Alvarez actually slipping and not being nearly as dominant as he was a few years ago. And fighting a dangerous fighter like Bud Crawford, I mean, if you are slipping and you're not as hungry as you once were, or not as good as you once were, I mean, you're giving up a lot of advantages to a very dangerous opponent. But let's break down the results of this fight. So if Canelo Alvarez goes in there and beats Bud Crawford by decision, split decision, majority decision, unanimous decision, doesn't really matter. We know what a lot of the pundits and media members will say. They will say that obviously the cards were biased, that Canelo Alvarez obviously always gets the decision leaning towards him. And obviously this would be used as a way to sort of take away this great victory to Canelo Alvarez's legacy. We've seen this done in multiple fights already. So, of course, we'd expect the same thing to happen in this case. There's a lot of Canelo Alvarez haters out there that don't really want to give him any credit at all, regardless of what he may do. He could fight 3 champions in 1 year to become undisputed, but people will totally undermine that and ignore it completely. In this case, if he's able to beat Bud Crawford, putting the first loss on Bud Crawford's resume, that is a historical accomplishment. All the rest of the garbage that people may throw out become redundant and ridiculous. The point is, if he beats Crawford, that is historic, that is legacy, and that is one of the greatest fights or greatest accomplishments of Canelo Alvarez's career. If he does the unimaginable, which a lot of people are leaning towards, even his own trainer, and potentially stop Bud Crawford, that would be a true statement. At that point, a lot of the stuff people are saying about Bud Crawford being too small and coming up to a weight class that probably doesn't benefit him might actually be reinforced by a knockout loss. If he isn't able to deal with Canelo Alvarez's power, it only reinforces that whole narrative. And instead of course, Canelo getting tons of praise for getting a spectacular knockout win, that's what people will say. They will say this just proves that Bud Crawford is a much smaller fighter and should never have been fighting at 168 pounds to begin with. And there may be a lot of truth to it. Of course, it's hard to speculate before we actually see how the fight unfolds. It might just not be a fantastic counterpunch that cracks Bud Crawford, and that's all she wrote. I mean, at that case, you'd have to give Canelo Alvarez full credit for being a great counterpuncher, which we know he is, with power. And because of that, obviously always has a puncher's chance of knocking out elite fighters such as a Bud Crawford. In my prediction, if I wanted to predict towards Canelo Alvarez, I don't expect him to get a knockout victory. Maybe a knockdown would be something I could imagine seeing. We've seen quite a few of Canelo Alvarez's opponents recently get dropped by Canelo's counterpunches. They were able to get up and go 12 rounds, and so I imagine that Bud Crawford, with his toughness and dog in him, would be able potentially to do the exact same thing if he does get caught and dropped. For Canelo, I mean, obviously if he beats Bud Crawford, that's going to elevate him up the pound for pound list. And because he's fighting a pound for pound fighter like Bud Crawford, I definitely think it puts him right in the top 3, along with Usyk and Inouye. Obviously, I would probably put him number 4 behind Bivol. And there would probably be Usyk, Inouye, Bivol, and Canelo Alvarez in my top 4 if Canelo can actually fulfill this goal to beat and upset the apple cart, putting the first loss on Bud Crawford's career. Tomorrow I will do the counterpoint to this, the Bud Crawford video, so stay tuned to that and listen to my breakdown and feelings regarding Bud Crawford and how people will respond if he's able to actually beat Canelo Alvarez. But at this point, I still don't know who I'm predicting to win this fight. That's why I felt it would be fair for me to make 2 videos such as this to give 2 different perspectives on 2 very good fighters. But feel free to leave in the comment section below, who do you think is going to win this fight? Do you think Canelo Alvarez, with his counter punching and power, is going to be too much for Bud Crawford? Or do you think Crawford's length and foot speed and overall ability will be too much for Canelo Alvarez. Stay tuned to tomorrow as I'll break down Bud Crawford and do the counterpoint to this point. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.